There's a lot of talk in the media about us receiving permission for respective actions. But strikes are not carried out with words. Such things are not announced. Missiles will speak for themselves. They certainly will.
You know how often we talk about how body language really means a lot? That was the most confident Zelensky I've seen in many, many months when he's making that claim there. In case you hadn't seen it, the president of the United States, at least according to Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, has given authorization to Zelensky to use American long-range weapons inside of Russia. Now, you know, because we've been talking about this for many months since it's been even hinted at that the United States might do that this is a terrible idea, that it's not going to change anything on the tactical battlefield, much less the operational or strategic. And I'm going to really show you graphically why that is in case anybody has any doubts later on. But those facts seem to be lost on so many people. Now, again, we've said many times, I can understand, even though I disagree with it, why Zelensky may have these delusions, because it's his country that's being dismantled and he's desperate for anything at all to try and change the dynamics. And why not try this last thing? Everything else has failed. Why not try this other one thing here? But listen, when you're talking about the Western leaders, and especially the president of the United States right now, barely 2 months from a transfer of power, when the United States people just voted into somebody else, one of his primary running points, especially in the international sphere, was to end the Russia-Ukraine war. So what possible sense would it make tactically, even if for American interest, to say, okay, I hear what the American people said, I hear what the incoming president said, but I, current president, but Joe Biden, am going to take action now that could potentially escalate this war and draw the United States into it, completely contradicting everything the American people said that they want, and tying the hands potentially of the incoming president before he even takes office. President Trump made many famous comments about how he's going to have this war over in a day, or maybe even resolved before he takes office. And now then, the current president seems to be saying, I'm going to have your hands tied before the first day in office and potentially escalate things so that you don't have a choice in the matter, or that you're significantly constrained in what you want to do. Let me just tell you categorically that these long-range missiles will not, absolutely will not do anything to change the dynamic on the battlefield. Ukraine has lost the war. It's just a matter of how many soldiers they're going to lose and how much more territory they're going to lose before a collapse and a defeat happens. It's now irreversible. You can't stop it. The dynamics and the components and the elements that are in place can't be stopped, certainly not by long-range missiles. And listen, you need to understand also, and we've talked about this, the Secretary of Defense, Austin, admitted this in public not too many months ago, just a couple of months ago, I think back in September. We don't have enough long-range missiles for our own needs, let alone to have a long-range campaign, which is what it would take to have even a shot at having an operational impact on this war. We don't have it. He also publicly said neither does Britain and France Scalp and Storm Shadow missiles. He said they don't have enough either. So why does anybody who has knowledge of that those actual inventory numbers are, why would anyone who understands operational art and the art of war, who has any understanding, think that in the 11th hour of an administration, after almost 3 years of disaster, that somehow that this action is going to change anything on the battlefield? It's irrational, and it's hard to even understand. And I want to give you a little context. One of the things we love about this, about having this channel, and why we even had it in the first place, is because we want to provide context to headlines. So many times, you're watching whatever, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, all these other networks. They have like a 3.5 minute package is kind of the average industry average on that. And they'll set something up. They'll have an expert come on and give 40 to 45 seconds of an answer on any question, and then they're off to the next subject. So you have about this much, more like this much, just a thin veneer of an understanding. We're going to help you understand the context with these missiles and show you graphically why they won't make any difference. And at the end, I'm going to tell you why this is so significant. So first of all, just in the recent past, you had Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, has been having a lot of domestic problems, and his government is on the verge of collapse. There's a vote of no confidence probably coming up, and a good portion of that is because of how he's handled the Russia-Ukraine war and how he's handled the West, et cetera. So he came out publicly about a week or so ago and said, hey, I'm going to talk to Putin. At my own initiative, I'm going to talk to Putin. And of course, that just set off tremors and shockwaves as people like, what are you talking about? Why are you going to talk to Putin? Here's what some of the media said about it.
The phone call. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke on the phone today, their first direct contact in nearly 2 years. Now, this picture of the call was posted to the Chancellor's account on the social media platform X. According to the German government, Scholz told Putin to end his war and withdraw Russian troops from Ukraine. He also urged Russia to be prepared to negotiate with Ukraine with the aim of achieving a just and lasting peace. And he reiterated Germany's support for Kyiv.
Okay, okay, let's see if I got this straight. Chancellor Scholz, who is on the verge of a no confidence vote and a collapse of his government, after 3 years of failed war with the West, and the best that all of the West has been able to put together has just been abysmal failures, is basically telling Putin, hey, man, how about you just surrender? Because that's effectively what he said. Stop your war, withdraw your troops, have a negotiated settlement that we like, and yay, everything's going to be great. And we are going to keep supporting Ukraine. Do you think that that's going to make Vladimir Putin quake in his boots? So that's what he said. Now, that's what was said publicly, let me point out. But one might think that maybe something different was conveyed in private. And I can assure you that Volodymyr Zelensky certainly thinks that, because had Olaf said in private what he said there and claimed in public, then you would certainly have had Zelensky applauding that, saying, yeah, that's a great idea. But instead, well, he had this reaction.
Chancellor Scholz told me that he is going to call Putin. Olaf's call, in my opinion, is Pandora's box. Now there may be other conversations, other calls. Just a lot of words. And this is exactly what Putin has wanted for a long time. It is crucial for him to weaken his isolation, Russia's isolation, and to engage in negotiations, ordinary negotiations that will lead to nothing, as he has been doing for decades. This allowed Russia to change nothing in its policy, to do nothing substantial, and ultimately it led to this war. We understand all these challenges now. We know how to act, and we want to warn everyone, there will be no Minsk III. What we need is real peace.
So at least publicly, you had Olaf Scholz claiming we're basically asking Putin to surrender. And then here, Zelensky follows that up on the same day and says, and you know what? There's not going to be a Minsk III. There's no negotiations. We were going to be strong, and we know. One wonders if he already knew that the approval for using long-range missiles had been granted. Again, you look at the body language, and you've seen us show a number of his body language over the last number of just a few months and weeks. And there's some times where he just looks like death warmed over, and he's just terrified about some things, like when he gave his victory plan, so-called, to his Rada a couple of months back. That there's not a lot of confidence in there, justly so, I might add. And now all of a sudden you see a much more confident and just declaring no more Minsk III. What's ironic, if not outright perverse, about that is that Putin also says there won't be a Minsk III because he did a Minsk I and II in 2015, and it was a complete failure and utter disaster, and was revealed years later by some of the heads of government from the French and German sides, that there was never any intention to actually follow those agreements, never to implement them. They were only to buy time for the Ukraine to build up its military force. So now why would Putin want to say, yay, let's have another Minsk III? So he's not even considering doing that. But now that when you hear Zelensky say the same thing, then you have to say, then we seem to be moving further and further away from any possibility of a negotiated settlement. The only thing that has a shot at ending the war and ending the Ukraine suffering is now becoming less and less likely by the very people and the very side who have the most to lose. Russia is on a military buildup still. They continue to get bigger, stronger, more powerful, more sustainable over a long period of time. Ukraine is moving in the exact opposite direction. There is no rational reason why anyone would want to follow that. But we seem to be oblivious to it. Now, if it was just Germany, Zelensky, and America, you could say, man, what is wrong with those people? But you're going to see it's a lot more than that. It's not more than just the government. Here is Shadow Defense Minister James Cartledge saying that, yeah, we need this because, oh, I know why, because North Korea.
What do you make of this decision by President Biden to give approval to Ukraine to use their weapons long range into Russia?
I welcome it very strongly. I think it's important. And I hope it is a precursor to the UK granting full autonomy on use of Storm Shadow. And the reason is actually quite straightforward. The fact that there are thousands of North Korean troops supporting Russia is a significant escalation. It's a worrying development. And I think given all the support we've given to Ukraine and the attacks we've seen in just the last 24 hours, the continued slaughter of innocent Ukrainians, we have to continue doing all that we can to support them.
We have to continue doing all we can to support them. Now, how do you define support? Because if you're supporting someone, you're trying to protect them, to try to take care of them. But when your actions are actually leading to their destruction and to more death and with no possibility of improving their situation, is that really support? And yet you see that kind of commentary going on all over the place. People keep saying the same kind of things. And by the way, I want to touch on that point about the North Korean. That's almost just a given that people in the West just acknowledge. Oh, yeah, North Koreans are now fighting with Russia. That's how it's happening on the ground. As of this morning, and I checked one more time before we came on the air here, there is no independent proof that North Koreans are fighting anywhere. They are in the country. And as many have said, that's not by itself an unusual thing. And they may yet come into contact. But up to this point, there is no independent proof that they have actually engaged in the fighting. Even if the numbers were true, what was reported, 10,000, as I've told you many times, that is not going to be any kind of a game changer because Russia has all the troops that they need. They continue to recruit 30 to 40,000 per month. Their force is continuing. By the end of the year, it's going to be somewhere around 1.5 million on active roles. It's probably at this point maybe 40 or 50,000 away from that number. 1.5 million active troops. They don't need 10,000. 10,000 is not going to make any difference at all, and they don't need that anywhere. But you have people like the Times Radio basically saying, "Yeah, this is going to be a game changer." Where have we heard that before? This is finally going to start putting pressure on Russia. You had John Bolton last night on CNN talking again about how, boy, they should have done this a long time ago and a lot more of them, but it's about time because this is something that can really change the name of the game. But it's not going to. And I actually want to show you something here. Well, before I do, let me show you that a couple of other people that are saying stuff which should alarm you even more. And that is, we'll first of all start with one of our favorite targets because he is so bad and gets so much air on the mainstream Western media, which is why it's so bad that he does this because so many people keep giving credibility to what he says. General Jack Keane.
This is a step in the right direction. We've got to give Ukraine more leverage and also push Putin into those negotiations and certainly releasing the long-range missiles to be able to attack inside of Russia, where Russia's been attacking, as Luke Thomason pointed out, all these, since the war began, into Ukraine makes compelling sense. Also, the Brits and the French are going to be able to do the same. The problem is they're restricting it just to the Kursk area, and that doesn't make any sense. It's another paralysis on a part of the administration, taking the knee to the threat of nuclear weapons. Can you imagine Putin is going to use a nuclear weapon now in the next couple of months before the Trump administration comes in? Does that make any sense to anybody in the world?
Wow, that amount of arrogance is shocking. And this is saying a lot from General Jack Keane, that he actually believes, and I think he does believe this. I don't think he's blowing smoke. He actually believes that Putin from the Kremlin in Moscow is actually thinking, when is the inauguration date? When is Trump coming in? Because I can't do anything until we find that on the calendar. And so then we can, make our decisions. Dude, they don't give a damn who's president of the United States, much less when he's going to be inaugurated. you're going to see some graphic evidence of why the Russians think that way. But you don't need to see what we're going to show subsequently, because it's just rational. They're in a war already. Heads of state come and go all the time. The nations are what matter here. Russia is going to do what makes sense for Russia, whose leader is not going to change on the 20th of January. They're going to make whatever decisions based on the realities on the ground. See, unlike us, they actually care about what happens on the ground. And you heard Keen there at the end just dismiss the idea Russia's not going to use nuclear weapons, like that's not even a concern. Now, you saw in one of our shows last week where I showed incoming Pete Hegseth, incoming defense secretary, when Trump does take over. At least he's been nominated. It's not sure he's actually going to get past confirmation, but that's who's going to be in there. And we showed you how when he was specifically asked, "Do you worry about nuclear war?" He's like, "Yeah, I guess kinda." That is a terrible attitude to have. Let me just tell you, it is the height of foolishness to not be terrified about the possibility of nuclear war. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of wisdom and strength to recognize the limits of power and to recognize that if you go too far in a policy, you may find yourself on the receiving end of a mushroom cloud. And for him to so casually dismiss it and to ignore what the Russians say, who have the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world, I should point out, is potentially catastrophically foolish. And if anybody is uncertain about how this specific issue strikes the Russians on long-range weapons, this is what Putin said in September.
Aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but with the support of a nuclear state, is proposed to be considered as their joint attack on Russia. Russia will also consider the possibility of using nuclear weapons when receiving reliable information about a massive launch of means of aerospace attack and their crossing of our state border. This includes strategic and tactical aircraft, as well as cruise missiles and drones, hypersonic and other delivery vehicles. Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in case of aggression, including if the enemy, using conventional weapons, poses a critical threat.
Listen, I know a lot of people say over and over that Putin doesn't mean what he says, that he's just a bunch of bluff, that he's in bluster. Was he bluffing in December of 2021 when he said he's going to use military force, technical military means? It was the exact quote that he said, if NATO continues to pursue the membership of Ukraine, and then he acted on it? I mean, what do people have to do? Was he bluffing when he said that he would do something to prevent Georgia from coming into Ukraine in 2006, I believe it was? Why do people not realize that when it comes to war and peace, the man doesn't bluff? Okay, for sure, the Russian side has used misinformation. They have made lots of threats and whatever, and they don't always carry them out. But when it comes to existential issues, he has a track record of carrying through with force of arms when he says certain lines are going to be crossed, and they can't be. So why would you want to play that maybe this time he doesn't mean it, when the potential consequences are so catastrophic? John Bolton last night on that CNN interview also just dismissed the idea. It's not possible. So it's not just Pete Hegseth. It's like all of the so-called intellectual elite in the United States. And that's on that one issue alone. And listen, let me show you why it's foolish to even think that the missiles could have some impact here. Gary, if you could put up that one map of the Kursk area. This on your map here, this is from the Institute for the Study of War. And as I always say, the Institute for the Study of War is terrible on analysis, but really good on mapping. And you see this, here's proof of it right here on the left side. This is August 16th, 10 days into the Ukrainian invasion into Russia. And you see that blue thatched area there is the limits to how far Ukraine had gotten. That was about the high water mark. They got a little bit more after that in the next few weeks. But then you look on the one on the right here, and you see that blue thatched area is now shrinking dramatically. And that is what Russia is doing up to this point without any North Korean troops. They don't need them. That's what they're doing on their own. So you don't need to see that. Now, let me show you something else specifically about the long-range missiles. So everybody seems to be talking about claiming, again, alleged people with qualifications, claiming that if this will turn the tide. I actually saw Michael Kaufman in the New York Times quoted yesterday as saying he thinks that if this is insufficient numbers, it can have an operational impact in the northern part of the front. And I just have to shake my head. Why would anyone think that that's going to have an operational impact? And in case you're not familiar with the military terms, there's tactical, operational, and strategic. Operational means in a whole portion of the theater of war. Folks, this isn't even going to have a tactical impact on the front. And if you need any proof, I've been telling you this a lot, and I'm going to show you a little clip here that puts it into context. Russia, for the last 2 years, has been on a methodical effort to use long-range weapons, striking throughout the Ukraine country, taking out all kinds of military sites, command and control, depots, arms depots, ammunition depots, weapons depots with Western stuff, fuel, etc., and energy infrastructure. And you see, after this consistent and sustained campaign, it has weakened the Ukraine side. But even though they're a lot smaller than Russia is, it still hasn't brought them to their knees. Now, this is just from this morning and talking about another big strike that happened from the Russian side against the Ukraine side overnight.
We got lots of information, lots of details and updates regarding Russian massive missile strike all over the entire territory of Ukraine. And according to the information we have, the Russians mainly were trying to destroy the Ukrainian facilities, energy facilities, the Ukrainian substations, the Ukrainian supply and support roads that the Ukrainians are using to support their forces in the eastern part of Ukraine. So if you take a look at the map, you're going to see the significant number of icons with a missile, and every single icon means the target that the Russians damaged or destroyed. And if we zoom in better, we will see that almost every single icon confirm Russian attack, either on some power plant like Dobrotiv power plant in the western part of Ukraine, or some substation. When talking about substations, we're talking, for example, the city of Kovel, or any other object of energy facilities. Also,
now, folks, that is one night's worth of strikes that have gone all throughout Ukraine, and nearly all of the targets were hit. So what limited air defense the Ukraine side has is just insufficient because of the number of missiles, drones, and rockets and airstrikes that the Russians can bring to bear. They're just almost helpless. And you see that doesn't knock them out. So why does someone think that the much bigger, massive land period size of Russia who has their stuff strategically scattered throughout their country and has a significant amount of air defense missiles, significant amount, that would be able to shoot down much, if not most, or if not all, of any kind of Ukraine drone strikes? They've tried several times, and some of them do get through, some of them. But the majority of them get shot down, and Ukraine just doesn't have them. But even if they did, if the Ukraine side, which has almost no air defense and nearly everything gets through, and it still doesn't knock them out of the war, by what logic can you say that the much stronger side, the much larger side, is going to be knocked out? And you see it is irrational. And yet, here's Philip Turley from France 24, foreign policy expert, seems to think it will.
The events over the past few days have convinced the US president that really there is absolutely no hope of negotiating any kind of deal with Vladimir Putin. He's not interested in going to the negotiating table unless he's able to keep hold of everything that he's already conquered in Ukraine, and that basically it's a waste of time. This phone call that happened between the German Chancellor Scholz and Vladimir Putin led to nothing, and I think there's a general feeling, even from the French President Emmanuel Macron, that whatever you try to do to talk to Vladimir Putin, it's not going to get anywhere. The only thing that Vladimir Putin is going to take any notice of is if he gets a bloody nose, and that's why they've given the green light for these missiles to be used to be fired into Ukrainian territory.
A bloody nose. Yep, that's it. That's all you got to do. Putin is just this big bully, and anytime you stand up to a bully and give him a bloody nose, I've seen it on all the TV shows and all the movies, he'll just back down and say, okay, we'll give you all your stuff back and we'll negotiate a deal to your advantage. Does anyone believe that? The trouble is, of course, it's a rhetorical question. Answer is yes, because people don't know any better. They're not watching shows like what you see here, which is one reason why I ask you so often, share this with people. They need to know the truth. They need to see. We show graphically in painful detail what they're saying, stuff like give them a bloody nose, is irrational, and it's completely opposite of what actually happens on the battlefield. You see, long-range missiles don't knock sides out. They are part of a broader strategy and a broader campaign. And if you have a lot of them and can sustain them for 2 years, they will help. And now then you see that on the Eastern Front, the Russian side is moving methodically to the west and now in increasingly larger chunks. So it's part of a big strategy. It'll help. Ukraine has no strategy. We don't have the missiles. And I saw shortly before we came on the air here, apparently Keir Starmer of the UK has in fact agreed that he's going to let Storm Shadow's missiles be used. Now, what do people think is going to happen? And I honestly, I wonder. There's a couple of different possibilities here. Oh, yeah, thanks, Gary. I was actually looking for that earlier. Thank you. Then in early September, you had U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin admit it's not going to be a game changer. We don't have enough. He went on to say in there, we don't have enough. Britain doesn't have enough. France doesn't have enough. He openly admitted that. You've seen us show many times this clip from, I believe it was also September, where National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that we don't have enough long-range interceptor missiles either. We had to scour them from all over the world and shut down everybody that we promised to have these weapons just to keep Ukraine going. And you see, as of last night's actions on the missile front, they don't have enough even for that. And of course, Israel is now using a whole bunch of them too and demanding even more. The numbers just aren't there. So then what then is the reason for this late 11th hour change by the president of the United States, and now supported by his most staunch and unquestioned ally in the UK? Man, for all of our British viewers here, and I know there's a lot of you guys that are following us from London and elsewhere in the UK. Man, I wish your leaders would finally stand up and say, what in the hell? I'm not going to have anything to do with that. We should look for our own interest here and not do something that's demonstrably foolish. I would love to see that. That wouldn't be a bad thing for America. We need a sober slap in the face to wake up and say, whoa, this is not going to work. And if even our most staunch ally doesn't get behind us, maybe we should stop. Unfortunately, that's not the case. That's, I guess, wishful thinking, because instead of slapping in the face, they're patting him on the back and giving him more encouragement to do so. Now, curious, we still haven't heard anything from the Trump incoming team. Now, I found that a little bit curious, because whatever Biden does here is going to tie his hands potentially by having, it's always harder to dial something back. And if Putin makes any actions, then he may have, instead of having this over on day one, it may be escalating on day one. And that is the big risk. It's a much bigger risk than anybody thinks. And listen, let me just explain to some folks here. The defense industrial base on the Russian side, they recognized in just the first few months of the war that, holy crap, we made a huge mistake and a major gamble on thinking that the Ukraine side was going to collapse just because we rolled a bunch of tanks into their country, and they didn't. They fought back heroically and caused severe damage to us. And now then we're going to have to crank up into a wartime economy, our defense industrial base, to be able to put forth enough to sustain combat over time. And it took them the better part of a year and a half to really get that stuff cranking, and now they are. Now, in the last 2 years, they have everything rolling off the assembly lines in long-range missiles, in these FAB bombs, tanks, artillery pieces. They're refurbishing old ones. In large numbers, they're still building some new ones, aircraft, helicopters, and, of course, every category of ammunition that you can imagine. They're in full strength going on that. Not only that, they have also added North Korea to the list. And North Korea, which was already one of the most highly militarized states in the planet, has apparently ramped up its capacity and is providing huge amounts of ammunition and other material support to the Russian side. Whether there's troops involved here or not, I saw in Bloomberg yesterday, they claimed that there were some reports that potentially 100,000 North Korean troops could be deployed at some point in the war. I don't know where that came from. I don't know if there's any truth to it at all. Again, as I said, Russia has plenty of troops. They don't have any shortage of that. And as we also discovered over the weekend, Ukraine's military is maybe down to 337,000, which is a shockingly small number when you see that the Russians have probably somewhere between 600 and 700,000 in Ukraine. Not just their total armed forces, but that's what's actually in Ukraine. Again, you see all the signs are in the direction of going here. On top of that, you have Russia and Iran, certainly in the drone spheres, et cetera. So there's a lot of industrial base. They've been ramping up their drone capacity for quite a long time. And as you probably also know, China has already recognized these things before, and they have a huge industrial base. As we've declared on this show, they have a 200 times higher capacity for shipbuilding than the United States. And that's just one category. And they have highlighted the need for long-range missiles and interceptor missiles more than a decade ago. And so they have the capacity 7-8 times higher than anything we have, and they've been building up their inventory, meaning we can't get into a war with any of these folks. And if this thing escalates, we will almost certainly lose. And if it goes nuclear, if we get fearful of having a military defeat and then we resort to nuclear weapons, even if Russia doesn't, I don't need to finish that sentence. You know what that could mean for our country. Because no matter what we want to say about how great our military is, and it's not anywhere near as strong conventionally as is believed, we do have a profoundly strong nuclear deterrent. But if we start to use that, then that means, folks, understand this, missiles come back. If they use a missile and you think, well, I'll just use 2 missiles and that'll show them and then they'll stop. That is delusion to the most dangerous degree you can get. They will not back down ever. They'll fire back 4 in response to your 2. And then you have the potential for absolute destruction of the 2 countries. Nobody would win. Everyone would lose. And frankly, as an American, I'm not as concerned about what happens to other people as I am about our country. And the country that we know that right now that exists as we're making this show would not survive. It would not exist in the form it did, almost certainly would never recover to the degree we are now. Therefore, it is the height of foolishness to play anything around the edges of a potential escalation to nuclear war. It is irrational to the highest degree. And I really, really hope that Trump, when he comes in, makes some major fundamental changes in how we do foreign policy so that we can preserve the freedom that we have. We can preserve our national security. We can preserve our ability to continue prospering economically indefinitely, which is entirely possible. All of that is on the table right now and can be chosen. That's one of the things we can actually choose to do. We can go down that path, or we can stay in this arrogant situation filled with hubris, blind to the realities on the ground, and continue to pursue the unattainable. And then we could lose everything also by our choice. Now, in the last section here, I want to play something that this was an interview with Peskov, one of the official spokesmen for the Russian side, talking about, well, okay, but what about when the Trump guys come in? To Keen's comment later on, thinking that, well, they won't do anything until Trump comes in because now then they can have a deal and they can work a deal. Here's what he said.
It was under Trump that Congress officially recognized our country as an adversary and an enemy of the United States. This was the famous Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, so they officially called us an enemy. Under this law, restrictions were placed on various banking transactions. That was the first precursor. It was under Trump that absolutely illegal seizures of our diplomatic properties were carried out. Both our Consulate General in San Francisco, our embassy holiday bases in the United States, and searches of the Consulate General residences in San Francisco and in New York. This is a complete violation of the Convention on Diplomatic Relations. At the same time, the U.S., under Trump, was allowing moves that aimed at breaking the system of strategic stability. They withdrew from the treaty on short and medium-range missiles. All this happened under the Trump presidency. So we see that words are one thing, and the reality in the United States is always quite another. This same deep state is not letting anyone off the hook, and the deep state is focused on continuing to try to strategically contain and oppress our country.
Now, we hear this term of deep state used all the time by people overseas, people in the United States. Everybody's got their own interpretation of what that is. But the bigger issue was, for the Russian side, they don't have the luxury of trying to understand what's going on and who's actually in charge, who isn't, how far does this so-called deep state influence. That doesn't matter to them, really. What does matter is what actions the United States takes. And what he's telling you is that they have seen, and you can just keep going back. There's Biden, Trump, first time, Obama, Bush. You see it. They just have to take, based on what's happening here, and you go all the way back to Clinton, because that's where all of this eastward movement of NATO began and continued on through all of them. So from their perspective, there's no difference. It's all the same. So for Keene to think that somehow Russia cares who's going to be the next president, or that this or that might happen when Trump comes in, Russia could care less. They only care about what the country has been doing and what it may well do. Therefore, they're going to take whatever actions they need to take to ensure their national security from their perspective. And that is the part that we need to really, really sober up immediately. We need like a couple of gallons of black coffee quickly to sober up before we make a catastrophic action here that can't be taken back later. Because it is possible that Russia could say, all right, you're going to use some long-range missiles. Maybe they won't do that much damage. Maybe it won't be that bad. And we don't want to get into a nuclear war. We don't want to escalate into war with NATO. So we'll give one shot to the Trump administration. That is a possibility. I don't discount that may happen, because Russia may calculate that that's in their national interest to give that a shot, but they may not. They may calculate that Trump is not going to be any different fundamentally than the Biden administration. And so in that case, they're going to take whatever actions they think they need to make based on the realities that exist. And if long-range weapons are used, especially because Putin put his reputation and name on the line, unlike a lot of these other alleged red lines that were crossed with tanks, offensive weapons, the HIMARS, the F-16s, et cetera, even the ATACMS earlier when they were previously authorized. And nothing, catastrophic happened after that. And so many in the West think nothing ever will, because it hasn't so far. It never will. But see, those were red lines we interpreted. This is the first one of any substance, just like the December 2021, before the war started. That was a direct statement by the Russian side. This is a direct statement, but this is their red line. This is not ours. This is not our interpretation. You just saw me play it. They're saying if you use long-range weapons, we will regard this as the direct participation of the United States, Germany, France, whoever, on Russia, and we will take appropriate countermeasures. Now, there are many in the West who think that Russia would never do that. They would never actually do anything. They would not themselves take in, because of Article 5, like it's a magic force field that will prevent anything from ever happening, because Russia won't challenge that. That has been the case up to this point, and for good reason. But it is not an impervious shield, and there is reason to believe, and Putin is probably seeing, there has been a fraying of the NATO alliance. They are not anywhere near as ironclad against Russia as is claimed by the likes of Keir Starmer and Joe Biden and Emmanuel Macron. It is not. Just ask Fico from Slovakia, or Viktor Orban from Hungary, and several others. Now even Schultz is maybe going a little wobbly. We'll wait and see. But if push comes to shove, Putin may say, all right, I've warned you. I gave you every opportunity. You didn't listen. And now we're going to take it to the next level, because they may calculate that the resolve is not there, and that a lot of these other NATO countries are not going to go to war with Russia because they're not in the crosshairs. Now, of course, Poland and the Baltics, et cetera, they're have a lot of antipathy historically, and understandably so, from the Russian side. They may want to do something, but Italy, Czech Republic, are they going to want to go to war when right now they have no threat from Russia whatsoever? It remains to be seen. And it could be that Russia themselves may be willing to call our bluff to see, we're thinking that Putin will never call our bluff. He may be thinking, you'll never call my bluff. And so you see the risk of both one or both sides being wrong about it, and then it being escalated here. If those long-range missiles are used, and if they strike something meaningful in Russia, it is unknown what's going to happen, but it could be really, really bad. And there is no reason to find out. As I just pointed out, there's every reason and every possibility, every open path to prevent this from escalating, to get this war off the table, to negotiate the best deal we can get for Ukraine, which every day we wait gets worse and worse, but is still better than a military defeat or an escalation. sanity, wisdom, and ration, morality. The more moral position is to stop the war, stop the pointless killing of Ukrainian lives and the loss of more territory. That is what we need to do, folks, and we need to do it today while we still can. Now, we're going to continue to track this situation as it goes forward. So far, we still haven't had a formal from the White House approval or confirmation that this has happened. And as we get any more information, we'll continue to bring it to you. Also, want to let you know we have Professor Omar Bartov to this afternoon at 3 p.m. He's going to be talking about the latest in the Israel situation, and he has some very, very interesting things to share. He has published something in the British media last week, which you're going to find very, very enlightening. Please join us at 3 p.m. today. And also, just a reminder that we are now on podcast. If you're not able to watch every show via the video here, I know a lot of you are traveling and you'd love to listen to podcasts. Go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, anywhere you get podcasts. Type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you will find us eagerly waiting for you there. Thank you very much, and we'll see you this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.